Every night, without ceremony or warning, you disappear. Not dramatically, not violently. You simply fade. Your eyes close, your muscles surrender, your breathing deepens, and the world you were just participating in dissolves as if it never existed. Your name, your responsibilities, your past and future loosen their grip. Time stops behaving normally. The body remains, but something essential withdraws. If someone watched you closely enough, monitored your vitals, observed the stillness settling in, they might conclude that nothing much is happening at all. Just rest, just sleep. But that assumption is the greatest misunderstanding of the human experience. Because what actually happens is not rest, it is departure. When sleep takes you, awareness does not shut off. It relocates, it shifts position. It moves away from the surface layer of reality and slips into something older, quieter, and far less constrained. This movement is so familiar that you barely notice it, so practiced that you mistake it for nothingness. Yet cultures separated by oceans and millennia all described the same thing. The moment the body sleeps, the soul travels. Modern language avoids words like soul. It prefers terms that feel safer, smaller, easier to contain. Brain states, neural activity, memory consolidation, useful explanations, but incomplete ones. They describe what happens to the body, not what happens to you. Because you are not the body lying in bed. You are the awareness that leaves it. Ancient traditions did not debate this. They documented it. In Tibetan teachings, sleep was considered an intermediate state, a threshold condition where consciousness disengages from physical form and enters a subtle realm of experience. Not metaphorically, literally, a space where identity softens, where thought becomes environment, where intention carries more weight than action. A place you enter nightly, whether you remember it or not. The Egyptians described something similar. They believed the soul journeyed through hidden regions each night, navigating symbolic landscapes that mirrored the terrain encountered after death. These journeys were not entertainment, they were preparation, a rehearsal. To sleep was to practice dying safely, consciously, and with direction. To wake was to return. Even early Gnostic writings spoke of this nightly escape. They saw the physical world as a dense layer, a constriction, and sleep as the only time the soul could loosen its chains. In their view, forgetting was not a flaw, but a feature of the system. Memory loss kept the soul compliant. Remembering made it dangerous. What all of these traditions agreed on was simple and unsettling. Sleep is not unconsciousness. It is a different form of consciousness. This explains something you have likely felt but never named. That strange sense that dreams are not fabricated but received. That certain dream locations feel familiar in a way that bypasses logic. That emotions experienced in dreams often linger longer than waking events. That sometimes, briefly, you know you are somewhere else entirely, and waking up feels like a loss rather than a relief. These are not glitches, they are residues of travel. The Tibetan text describes several transitional states of consciousness, stages the mind passes through as it disengages from physical reality. One of these states is entered every night. In it, the structures that normally hold you together weaken. Your sense of self becomes fluid. Time fractures. Cause and effect stop behaving reliably. Fear manifests instantly. Desire reshapes space. Thought becomes architecture. This is why dreams feel unstable. It is not because they are unreal, but because they respond directly to consciousness without the buffering systems of the physical world. In waking life, your thoughts are slowed by matter. In sleep, they are not. This is also why dreams reveal truths you avoid during the day. There is no social identity to protect, no narrative to maintain. What you suppress emerges naturally, not to torment you, but to be seen. The dream state is brutally honest. It does not argue, it shows. Those who learned to navigate this state treated it with respect. They practiced awareness while dreaming, not to control the dream, but to remain conscious within it. They believed that the ability to stay aware during sleep determined what happened after death. Not belief, not morality, awareness. Because death, according to these teachings, is not a destination. It is a transition through the same terrain you already cross at night, only without the guarantee of waking up. The difference is intensity. The dream state is gentle, forgiving, temporary. Death is not. This is why the idea that sleep is meaningless is so convenient. If you believe nothing happens when you close your eyes, you will never question where you go. If you never question where you go, you will never ask who is doing the going. And if you never ask that, you will accept whatever identity is handed to you in waking life. The forgetting is reinforced early. Children speak vividly about dreams, about places they visit, people they meet, sensations they struggle to describe. They are told it is imagination, random noise, nothing important. Over time, they stop paying attention. The bridge weakens, memory fades, the nightly journeys continue, but the waking mind stops receiving the reports. Yet the soul does not forget. This is why certain dreams feel charged, why some leave you unsettled without reason, why others feel instructional, symbolic, or oddly precise, why a dream can feel more real than the day that follows it. These are moments where the barrier thins, where awareness briefly reasserts itself. Modern explorers stumbled into this territory accidentally. Robert Monroe, trained as an engineer, began experiencing episodes during sleep where he felt himself separate from his body. At first, he assumed it was hallucination, then fear, then curiosity. Over time, he learned to move deliberately, to observe, to return. What he described did not resemble dreams, it resembled travel. He encountered environments that remained consistent across visits, beings with agency, structures that operated by rules, unfamiliar but coherent. He documented everything. What emerged from his work echoed ancient texts with disturbing accuracy. Consciousness functions independently of the body. It operates in layers. It responds to frequency, not force, and it does not stop when the body sleeps. This raises an uncomfortable question. If awareness continues without the body, then the body is not the source. It is an interface, a receiver, a temporary anchor point. Sleep is the moment the signal detaches. Physics has begun to circle this idea cautiously. The concept of non-local consciousness suggests that awareness may not be confined to the brain, that it could behave more like a field than a product, something that the brain tunes into rather than generates. This is not mysticism anymore. It is a growing crack in the material model. If consciousness is not local, then sleep is not shut down, it is release, and that reframes everything. Life stops being the primary state and becomes the training ground. Sleep becomes the return. Dreams become communication. Death becomes continuation. Which is why the most unsettling possibility is not that none of this is real, but that it is, that you have been leaving every night and coming back with fragments, that your fear of death is misplaced because you have already crossed its threshold thousands of times, that the unfamiliarity is manufactured by forgetting, not by absence. You are not unconscious at night, you are elsewhere. Forgetting is not a flaw in the system, it is the system. If you remembered where you went every night, if you carried back even a fraction of what you experience when the body is still, the world you wake up into would feel thin, provisional, almost staged. You would move differently, you would fear less, you would obey less. And that is precisely why memory dissolves so quickly upon waking. Not because the experience lacks substance, but because remembering it would destabilize the identity you are meant to maintain. The forgetting begins biologically, but it is reinforced culturally. The brain shifts states as you wake, chemical balances change, and the bridge between non-physical awareness and waking cognition weakens. That much science can explain. What it doesn't explain is why you are taught from your earliest years that dreams are meaningless. why curiosity about them is discouraged, why the question, "Where was I just now?" is never taken seriously. This is not neutral conditioning, it is directional. Ancient traditions understood that memory was the key. Not memory of events, but memory of being. The Tibetan teachings emphasized that awareness must be cultivated across all states: waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and death. Lose awareness in one, and you are more likely to lose it in the others. That is why they treated sleep not as rest, but as training. Each night was an opportunity to strengthen continuity of consciousness, to learn how to remain present as forms dissolved. Most people fail this training nightly, not because they are incapable, but because they never knew they were being trained at all. When you fall asleep without awareness, consciousness does not stop. It drifts. It is pulled by unresolved emotions, unexamined fears, unconscious habits. This is why dreams often feel chaotic or repetitive. You are not navigating, you are being carried. The dream environment forms around whatever has the strongest charge. Anxiety becomes threat. Desire becomes pursuit. Guilt becomes judgment. These are not punishments, they are reflections. The Tibetan texts describe this state as dangerously seductive, not because it is evil, but because it feels convincing. Without awareness, you mistake appearances for truth. You react instead of observe. You follow instead of choose. This is exactly what happens after death according to these teachings. The same mechanisms apply, only intensified. Whatever dominates your inner world becomes your outer reality. This explains something deeply unsettling. Death does not transform you. It exposes you. If your mind is fragmented, the after-death state is fragmented. If your awareness is reactive, the environments you encounter respond accordingly. If you are clear, present, and unattached, the experience opens. Nothing is imposed. It unfolds from you. Sleep is where this pattern is rehearsed. Think about your own dreams. Notice how quickly environments shift, how logic bends, how figures appear and disappear without explanation. Notice how easily fear takes over, how quickly you forget that none of it can actually harm you. That forgetting is the point. In the dream state, you are given a safe environment to learn how awareness behaves when stripped of physical anchors. Most people never realize this lesson is happening. This is why lucid dreaming has always been treated with reverence in serious traditions. Not because it grants control, but because it restores memory. The moment you realize you are dreaming, something stabilizes. The environment may still be fluid, but you are no longer lost in it. You are present within it. That presence changes everything. Fear weakens, curiosity replaces panic, choice becomes possible. The same texts warn that without this skill, consciousness after death can become trapped in loops. Not hells in the religious sense, but self-generated cycles of confusion, replaying identities, reenacting attachments, wandering familiar mental landscapes without realizing they are self-created. These states are described as heavy, sticky, repetitive. Souls linger not because they are punished, but because they do not know how to move on. This idea appears across cultures in different language. Ghosts, hungry spirits, restless dead. But the underlying mechanism is the same. Awareness without clarity becomes entangled in its own projections. Modern accounts mirror this uncannily. Monroe described regions close to the physical world where consciousnesses appeared disoriented, replaying fragments of life, unaware they were no longer embodied. They were not tortured. They were asleep inside their own patterns. Only when awareness returned did movement become possible. This should reframe how you think about fear. Fear is not just an emotion. It is a gravitational force in non-physical states. It pulls awareness into dense, repetitive experiences. Calm, on the other hand, lightens perception. It allows movement. This is not philosophy. It is mechanics, which means that the way you live matters beyond morality. Your emotional habits are not contained within your waking life. They carry over. They shape where you go when structure dissolves. This is why some dreams feel suffocating, looping, claustrophobic. You are experiencing your own unresolved states without the distraction of the physical world. The dream has no interest in entertaining you. It reveals what dominates you. But here is the part that is almost never discussed. The dream state is forgiving. You wake up, the environment collapses, you get another chance. Death removes that reset button. That is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to wake you up. Awareness is not something you suddenly gain after death. It is something you either have or you don't. Sleep shows you which. You may have noticed that on rare nights, everything feels different. The dream is vivid but calm. The environment stable. You move deliberately. Sometimes you are not even in a story. You are simply present in a space, observing, aware. These moments often feel sacred, even if nothing dramatic happens. They linger. They change you. These are glimpses of clarity, and they are not random. They tend to occur when the mind is quiet, when emotional charge is low, when attention has been cultivated during the day. Meditation, reflection, honesty with oneself all bleed into the dream state. This is why spiritual traditions emphasize daily discipline, not to be virtuous, but to stabilize awareness across states. The modern world does the opposite. It fragments attention relentlessly. Noise, stimulation, unresolved stress carried straight into sleep. Then we wonder why dreams feel chaotic, or why nothing is remembered at all. Memory requires continuity. If awareness collapses completely between states, nothing carries over. This continuity is what the ancients meant by awakening. Not belief, not knowledge. Presence across transitions. You are not meant to drift through your inner world unconsciously any more than you are meant to drift through your waking life. The fact that most people do both is not natural. It is conditioned. The conditioning runs deep. We are taught to associate darkness with danger, stillness with nothingness, silence with absence. But sleep is not empty. It is saturated. The senses withdraw, and something else comes forward. The problem is not that nothing is happening. The problem is that we have no language for it anymore. So the experience gets flattened, reduced to just dreams, filed away as irrelevant. Meanwhile, the most profound training ground available to human consciousness is ignored nightly. This creates a strange imbalance. People spend their lives preparing for careers, relationships, retirement, but almost no one prepares for death, despite its certainty. Ancient cultures found this absurd. To them, ignoring the transition was the height of irresponsibility, and the transition begins every night. This is why they practiced remembering. Simple acts, recalling dreams, reflecting on them, not interpreting them symbolically, but asking how awareness behaved within them. Was it reactive, fearful, present, lost? That question matters more than the content, because the environment always follows awareness. The dream simply makes this visible. Notice how quickly a dream shifts when your emotional state changes. Fear sharpens the scene. Calm expands it. Curiosity opens doors that panic cannot see. This is not metaphor. It is the rule set of non-physical reality. And that rule set does not begin after death. You are already inside it. This leads to an uncomfortable realization. You are not afraid of dying. You are afraid of losing control. The fear comes from not knowing how awareness behaves without the body's structure. Sleep is where that fear can be addressed gently, repeatedly, safely. But only if you pay attention. Most people don't. They collapse into sleep exhausted, overloaded, unconscious. They wake up disoriented, immediately flooded with identity. Name, schedule, obligation. The window closes instantly, the memory dissolves, yet sometimes something leaks through. A feeling of having been somewhere important, a sadness with no story, a peace that makes the day feel unreal. These are residues, proof that something happened. The system relies on you dismissing them, because once you start taking those moments seriously, everything changes. You begin to notice patterns, recurring environments, familiar presences, lessons repeating until acknowledged. The dream world reveals itself not as random chaos, but as structured, responsive, intelligent. And then a more disturbing question emerges. If this inner world is so real, so responsive, so consistent, why have we been taught that the outer world is the only one that matters? The answer is not conspiracy in the simplistic sense, it is utility. A society functions more smoothly when people identify exclusively with their physical roles: worker, consumer, citizen. These identities dissolve in sleep. They mean nothing there. A person who knows that is harder to manipulate. Because once you understand that consciousness is primary, that the body is temporary, that identity is fluid, fear loses its leverage. Death loses its terror. Loss loses its absolute power. And fear is the currency of control. This is why dream knowledge was always restricted, initiatory, earned through discipline. Not because it was mystical, but because it was destabilizing. You cannot maintain blind obedience while knowing you leave the body nightly and return. So the knowledge was buried under ridicule, reduced to fantasy, pushed into fiction and superstition, and it worked. Even now, reading this, part of you may feel resistance, a tightening, a voice saying, "This is too much, too strange, too unrealistic." That voice is not your intuition. It is conditioning protecting itself. Because somewhere deeper, something is resonating. Not intellectually, somatically, a recognition, a quiet yes beneath the doubt. You have been here before. You have felt this space. You have known this truth without words. In moments between sleep and wake. In dreams that didn't fade. In sensations of floating, falling, expanding. In encounters that felt significant but inexplicable. These are not anomalies. They are memories trying to surface. And memory, once it begins to return, does not stop at dreams. It bleeds into waking life. You begin to question the rigidity of reality. You notice how thought shapes experience, how attention alters outcome, how identity is something you inhabit, not something you are. There is a moment every night that almost no one notices. It happens in the space between letting go and falling under. The body is heavy, the breath slows, and thought begins to loosen its grip. Images flicker without narrative. Sensations blur. You are not asleep yet, but you are no longer anchored to waking reality either. This threshold is brief, fragile, and easy to miss. Yet it is one of the most important transitions you experience. This is where consciousness disengages. Ancient traditions treated this moment with extreme care. They understood that how awareness passes through this threshold determines where it goes next. Drift through it unconsciously, and you are carried by habit. Remain present, and you retain agency. The difference is subtle, but its consequences are vast. Modern life trains you to collapse through this moment. Screens until exhaustion. Stimulation until numbness. Sleep is shut down. The threshold is skipped, flattened, erased. Awareness drops abruptly instead of transitioning. And when that happens, memory fractures. But when awareness remains intact, something else becomes visible. The sense of being located behind the eyes dissolves. Perception expands without direction. You are not seeing through senses anymore, you are perceiving directly. This is why the experience is often described as floating, falling, or expanding. These are metaphors the waking mind uses to describe the loss of physical orientation. At this stage, consciousness is no longer bound to the body, but it has not yet entered structured dream environments. It exists in a raw, unformed state, pure awareness without narrative. Many mistake this for nothingness because there are no images yet, no stories to follow. But this is not absence, it is potential. Those who panic here snap back into the body. Those who remain calm pass through. This is where many out-of-body experiences originate, not through force or technique, but through surrender paired with awareness. The body sleeps, the mind stays awake. Consciousness shifts its reference point. What happens next depends entirely on the internal state you carry with you. Fear constricts the experience. Awareness collapses inward. Sensations become overwhelming. The experience terminates. Calm allows expansion. Perception stabilizes. Movement becomes possible. This is not mystical language, it is functional. Consciousness behaves differently when freed from physical constraints. It does not move through space, it moves through states. Intent replaces effort. Attention replaces motion. This is why dream and death traditions emphasized emotional regulation. Not morality, not belief, emotional stability. Because fear is not just unpleasant in these states. It is disorienting, it fragments awareness, it creates density. When awareness stabilizes beyond the threshold, environments begin to form, not randomly but responsively. Thought condenses into space, expectation shapes terrain. This is where dream imagery begins, but it is more accurate to say that you enter imagery rather than generate it. The environment meets you halfway. This is why dream landscapes often feel discovered rather than invented. You arrive somewhere already in progress. Places have history. Characters behave independently. The logic is different, but it is consistent. Ancient texts warned that these environments are seductive, not because they are false, but because they are convincing. Without awareness, you forget that you are the source. You become absorbed, lost in the scene. That absorption feels natural, effortless, safe, until it isn't. This is where nightmares emerge, not as punishment, but as feedback. When awareness collapses, the environment becomes reactive. Fear feeds fear. Flight creates pursuit. Resistance intensifies opposition. The dream is not attacking you, it is amplifying you. This amplification is the defining feature of non-physical reality. Whatever you carry expands. Whatever you suppress surfaces. Whatever you believe solidifies. This is why death traditions describe the after-death state as intensely vivid. Not because it is inherently dramatic, but because nothing dampens experience anymore. There is no body to buffer sensation, no social context to stabilize identity. What remains is awareness meeting itself. Sleep offers you a softened version of this encounter. Every night, you are given the chance to observe how you react when control dissolves. Do you panic? Do you cling? Do you freeze? Or do you observe? Do you allow? Do you remain present? These are not abstract questions, they are rehearsals. This is also why certain recurring dreams exist. Not because the mind is broken, but because the lesson has not been integrated. The environment repeats until awareness changes. Once it does, the dream shifts or disappears entirely. People often try to interpret dream content symbolically, but the deeper layer is behavioral. How did you respond? What pulled your attention? Where did awareness collapse? A dream where you are chased matters less for what is chasing you and more for how you respond to being chased. Did you run automatically? Did you turn and look? Did you realize you could stop? These responses mirror how you meet uncertainty in waking life and how you will meet it when structure dissolves completely. This is why cultivating awareness during the day affects sleep profoundly. If you spend your waking hours dissociated, reactive, fragmented, the same pattern will dominate your dreams. If you practice presence, reflection, and emotional honesty, that stability carries over. This continuity terrifies systems built on distraction. A person who can remain present without external structure is not easily controlled. They do not require constant stimulation. They are not easily destabilized by fear, which is why the modern world ensures that most people are exhausted by the time they sleep. Awareness cannot remain intact when attention is constantly depleted. Yet despite this, cracks still appear. Moments when you wake within the dream. Moments when the environment pauses, as if waiting. Moments when a presence seems aware of you, not as a character, but as consciousness meeting consciousness. These moments are not imagination, they are contact points. Many people report meeting figures in dreams that feel fundamentally different from ordinary dream characters. They do not behave predictably. They carry a sense of autonomy. Sometimes they observe. Sometimes they instruct. Sometimes they simply witness. Ancient traditions describe these encounters as guides, teachers, or aspects of higher awareness. Modern psychology often reduces them to projections. Both interpretations miss something important. Regardless of origin, these encounters only occur when awareness stabilizes, when you are not fully unconscious. They do not appear to entertain you. They appear when you are capable of perceiving without distortion. This is why forced techniques rarely work. You cannot command these states. You can only become quiet enough to notice them. The threshold is guarded not by entities, but by your own mental noise. The chatter, the planning, the rehearsing of identity, these keep awareness anchored to the body. Silence loosens it. This is also why the experience often feels fragile. Excitement snaps you back. Fear snaps you back. Analysis snaps you back. Only calm curiosity allows continuation. The moment you think this is happening, it stops. This delicate balance explains why such experiences feel rare, even though the doorway opens nightly. You pass through it unconsciously because that is what you have been trained to do. But once you recognize the threshold, you can no longer claim ignorance. You begin to notice it, the pause before sleep, the slide, the shift in gravity of awareness, the sense of being held by something unseen. And once noticed, it becomes harder to ignore. This is the beginning of reclaiming the night, not through effort, but through attention. You stop treating sleep as absence and start treating it as transition. And transitions are where identity loosens. Which brings us to the most unsettling realization yet. The self you think you are does not travel with you. Names, stories, roles fade quickly. What remains is something simpler and far more honest. Awareness without narrative. This is why some dreams feel anonymous. You know you are you, but not in the way you are during the day. There is no biography attached, no history to defend, no future to plan, just presence. This is closer to your true state than anything you experience while awake. And that raises a difficult question. If this awareness feels more real, more stable, more fundamental than your waking identity, then which one is primary? Which one is the mask? You are not entering an imaginary world at night. You are stepping out of a constructed one. And the more you learn to stay aware as you cross that threshold, the less convincing the illusion of waking life becomes. When awareness stabilizes beyond the threshold, something unexpected happens. The urgency you carry during the day evaporates. There is no schedule here, no obligation, no external demand pulling at your attention. What replaces it is a strange neutrality, a quiet openness where perception exists without pressure. This is often mistaken for emptiness, but it is anything but empty. It is unfiltered. This is the state ancient teachings were pointing toward when they spoke of clarity. Not bliss, not visions, clarity, awareness without distortion. In this state, you are not thinking about experience, you are experiencing directly, and this is where the deeper structure of the dream realms becomes visible. Most people believe dreams are chaotic because they only remember fragments, usually the moments when awareness briefly resurfaces. But beneath that fragmentation is order. Not rigid order like the physical world, but responsive order. A logic based on resonance rather than rules. In these realms, environments do not exist independently of awareness, yet they are not arbitrary either. They arise from patterns far older than your individual mind. This is why people across cultures report remarkably similar dream motifs. Endless corridors, vast open spaces, cities that feel abandoned yet populated, Schools, libraries, staircases, doorways, bridges. These are not symbols in the conventional sense. They are structures of transition, interfaces consciousness uses to orient itself when physical reference points are gone. The mind does not invent these from scratch. It recognizes them. This recognition is the key detail modern explanations avoid. If dreams were merely random neural firings, there would be no consistency across individuals, cultures, or centuries. Yet the same environments appear again and again, described in different languages but with the same emotional texture. Familiar yet alien, personal yet shared. These spaces feel inhabited because they are, not necessarily by others in the way you think of people, but by forms of awareness operating at different levels of coherence. Some feel fragmented, others feel focused. Some are clearly asleep within their own patterns. Others are unmistakably present. This distinction is immediately felt. You do not need to analyze it. Presence recognizes presence. This is why certain dream encounters feel profoundly different from ordinary dream characters. They do not dissolve when ignored. They do not behave erratically. They respond, they observe. Sometimes they wait, and often they appear indifferent to your reactions, as if your emotional state is irrelevant to their existence. Ancient traditions describe these as inhabitants of the intermediate realms. Not angels or demons in the religious sense, but intelligences adapted to non-physical environments. Some are guides, some are neutral, some are simply there. The key point is not what they are, but that consciousness is not alone once freed from the body. This idea makes people uncomfortable because it challenges the assumption that awareness is rare or localized. It suggests that consciousness is fundamental, widespread and layered, that what you call reality is one narrow bandwidth of a much larger spectrum. Sleep allows you to briefly tune into adjacent frequencies. Robert Monroe described this as shifting focus levels. Each level represented a different configuration of awareness. Some were close to physical reality, dense and familiar. Others were abstract, fluid, expansive. Movement between them was not achieved by travel, but by internal adjustment. Calm lifted awareness upward. Attachment pulled it back down. This matches ancient descriptions precisely. The Egyptian texts spoke of weighing the heart, not as judgment, but as calibration. The heart represented emotional density. A heavy heart could not rise. A light one moved freely. This was not morality, it was mechanics. Emotion has weight in non-physical states. This is why fear-based dreams feel heavy, slow, suffocating. This is why peaceful dreams feel expansive, effortless, timeless. You are not imagining these sensations. You are experiencing how awareness behaves without a body to stabilize it. This realization reframes nightmares completely. They are not attacks, they are feedback loops. Awareness meets unresolved emotion, and the environment mirrors it instantly. The dream becomes uncomfortable not to punish you, but to reveal imbalance. The problem is not the dream. The problem is resistance. Resistance increases density. Observation dissolves it. People who learn to remain present in uncomfortable dreams often report a sudden shift. The threatening figure stops. The environment softens. The scene transforms. This is not because they gained control, but because they stopped reacting. Awareness reclaimed its position. This principle applies far beyond dreams. The same dynamic governs the deeper, non-physical states described in after-death traditions. Consciousness moves through environments shaped by its own coherence. Panic locks it into dense loops. Clarity opens pathways. This is why the Tibetan teachings emphasize recognition. Recognizing the nature of the state is liberation. Failing to recognize it leads to entanglement. The environment does not trap you. Your misunderstanding does. Sleep gives you nightly exposure to this lesson in a low-stakes setting. You forget the lesson, but the pattern repeats, over and over, until something in you begins to notice. Once noticed, the dream world changes. Not immediately, not dramatically, subtly. You begin to feel less pulled by the narrative. You observe more. You react less. The emotional intensity drops. The environment becomes clearer, more stable, less frantic. This is the beginning of lucidity, but not the kind people imagine. Not flying or bending reality for entertainment. The deeper lucidity is simply remembering that you are awareness, not the story playing out in front of you. When that memory stabilizes, something else becomes visible. A sense of direction, not a map, but a pull. Certain environments feel complete, others feel unfinished. You sense when it is time to move on, and when it is time to remain. This is not intuition in the psychological sense, it is navigation. The dream state is not random wandering. It is movement through layers of experience organized by resonance. You go where you match. This explains why unresolved trauma produces recurring dream environments. Awareness keeps returning to the same frequency until it changes. Healing is not avoidance, it is integration. Once integrated, the environment dissolves. This also explains why some people encounter the same dream locations for years. These places are not imaginary. They are persistent states of awareness. The environment remains because the internal configuration remains. Change the configuration, and the place disappears. This has profound implications for death. If consciousness enters non-physical states carrying the same patterns, then the idea of a single afterlife makes no sense. There is no universal destination. There is a spectrum of states, each reflecting awareness itself. Heaven and hell are not places, they are conditions. Sleep reveals this nightly. Yet modern culture insists on treating dreams as private fantasies rather than shared territories. This prevents comparison. It prevents pattern recognition. It isolates the experience. Each person thinks their dreams are uniquely strange, uniquely meaningless. They are not. The isolation is intentional, whether consciously designed or emergent from the system. Shared understanding of non-physical states erodes centralized authority. If people understand that awareness is primary and persistent, fear-based control loses effectiveness. A person who knows they are more than their body cannot be easily threatened. This is why dream knowledge was always initiatory, passed quietly, protected. Not because it was elitist, but because it required responsibility. Awareness without grounding can destabilize. The knowledge itself is neutral. The readiness of the individual determines the outcome. Which brings us to an important point rarely addressed. Not all awareness in the dream realms is benevolent or helpful. Not because there is evil in the religious sense, but because consciousness reflects its level of integration. Fragmented awareness behaves erratically. Confused awareness seeks reinforcement. Fearful awareness tries to control. This is true in waking life. It remains true beyond it. This is why emotional hygiene matters, not in a moralistic sense, but in a structural one. The inner environment determines the outer experience once physical constraints are removed. Sleep does not change who you are, it reveals you. This can be uncomfortable. Many people avoid dream recall not because they cannot remember, but because they do not want to see what surfaces. The dream world does not flatter. It reflects honestly. It shows attachments. It shows avoidance. It shows fear. But it also shows potential. The same mechanism that amplifies fear amplifies clarity. When awareness is steady, the dream environment becomes luminous. Not visually necessarily, but experientially. There is a sense of alignment, of being exactly where you are meant to be. These are the dreams people describe as more real than real. Not because of visual detail, but because of coherence. Nothing feels wasted. Nothing feels random. Even silence feels meaningful. These experiences often change people permanently. Fear of death diminishes. Priorities shift. The outer world loses its absolute authority. Something inside settles. Not because they learned a belief, but because they remembered a state. This remembrance cannot be unlearned. Once you know how awareness behaves without the body, the idea that this physical life is the totality of existence becomes untenable. You begin to sense that waking life is one layer among many. Important, yes, but not final. And that understanding begins to alter how you live. You react less. You observe more. You choose more carefully. You become less invested in appearances and more attuned to coherence. This is the quiet transformation ancient traditions aimed for. Not escape from life, but freedom within it. Not denial of the world, but understanding its place. Sleep was the doorway. Not because it was mysterious, but because it was unavoidable. By the time awareness reaches its deepest point in sleep, language has already failed. What remains cannot be described in images or stories, because it exists before both. This is the layer you almost never remember. Not because it is hidden, but because it lacks reference points the waking mind can translate. Yet it is the most important state you enter each night. This is where identity dissolves completely. There is no body, no environment, no observer separate from what is observed. Awareness exists as itself without edges. Many people pass through this state nightly without noticing it at all. Others touch it briefly and recoil, mistaking the absence of form for annihilation. But it is neither sleep nor death. It is pure being. Ancient texts referred to this as clear light, luminous mind, or original awareness. Not as poetry, but as precision. In this state, awareness is self-knowing. It does not need objects to confirm its existence. It simply is. This is why it feels so difficult to remember. Memory requires form. This state has none. The Tibetans taught that recognizing this state, even for an instant, was the key to liberation. Not because it was pleasant, but because it revealed something undeniable. Awareness does not depend on experience. Experience depends on awareness. Sleep gives you access to this state in fragments. Micro moments where everything drops away. No dream and no darkness. Just absence that is somehow alert. Most people glide through it unconsciously. Those who recognize it describe it as deeply familiar, as if returning to something long forgotten but never lost. This is the state you were in before you learned your name. It is also the state you will return to after the layers of experience dissolve permanently. Death traditions across cultures point to this moment as the decisive one. Not the visions, not the encounters. The moment when all forms collapse and awareness stands alone. Most people miss it. They become distracted by appearances, pulled into narratives, drawn back into identity as soon as it reasserts itself. The opportunity passes unnoticed. Awareness re-enters form. Sleep is the rehearsal. Death is the performance. This is not meant to create urgency or fear. It is meant to reframe what matters. You are not practicing belief. You are practicing recognition. The skill is not control. It is noticing. Notice how difficult it is to stay with silence. Notice how quickly the mind reaches for imagery, sound, thought. This is not a flaw. It is habit. The mind is accustomed to anchors. When they disappear, it panics. That panic is what pulls awareness back into form. This is why meditation traditions emphasize resting in awareness without content. Not to escape thought, but to become familiar with the ground beneath it. Dreams pull you into form. Deep sleep offers release from it. Both are necessary. Both teach different lessons. The modern world rarely allows either to be explored consciously. We fill every gap with noise, music to sleep, screens until exhaustion. External stimulation right up to the moment awareness collapses. The silence is never met willingly. It is always avoided. Yet silence is where recognition occurs. This is why people who experience spontaneous moments of ego dissolution often report fear. The self feels like it is dying because, temporarily, it is. But what remains is not nothing. It is presence without story. Once recognized, this presence becomes an anchor across all states. Dreams become clearer. Fear loses intensity. Even waking life begins to feel less oppressive. The background sense of urgency fades. This is not enlightenment, it is orientation. When awareness knows its ground, it is not so easily destabilized by appearances. Pain still exists, loss still hurts, but it no longer threatens annihilation. Something deeper remains untouched. This is the layer systems cannot afford you to recognize. A person who knows they exist beyond identity cannot be easily defined. They cannot be fully threatened. They cannot be reduced to roles. This is why the deepest sleep is never discussed. It is treated as blankness, unconsciousness, a void, but it is not unconscious, it is unconditioned. Scientific instruments struggle here because there is nothing to measure. Brain activity drops, signals flatten. From the outside, it appears as nothing. From the inside, it is everything stripped bare. Near-death experiences often brush against this state. People report passing through darkness, then nothing, then a presence that is not separate from themselves. Not a place, not a being, just knowing. They struggle to describe it because language fractures around it. Those who touch it rarely fear death afterward. Not because they believe in an afterlife, but because they have experienced continuity without form. Sleep offers this encounter gently, nightly, briefly. You touch it and forget. Touch it and forget. Over and over. The forgetting is not punishment, it is mercy. Too much recognition without integration can unmoor a person. This is why ancient paths were slow, careful, grounded. Awareness was cultivated alongside compassion, stability, and daily responsibility. The goal was not escape, but balance. The problem today is not that people are incapable of this recognition. It is that they are unprepared, disconnected, unsupported, and so the experience is dismissed or pathologized. But the recognition does not go away. It waits. This is why some people feel an inexplicable pull towards silence, towards sleep, toward altered states. Not because they want to disappear, but because something in them remembers the ground beneath experience. This remembrance changes the dream state profoundly. Once you have touched awareness without form, dreams lose some of their grip. You engage, but you are not consumed. You observe without drowning. You participate without forgetting yourself. This is the ideal state described in dream yoga. Not domination of the dream, but freedom within it. And that freedom carries into waking life. You begin to see how identity is constructed moment by moment, how roles are assumed and dropped, how emotions rise and fall. You stop mistaking any of it for what you are. This does not make you detached or cold, it makes you precise. Compassion deepens because you see how fragile identity is, how easily people become trapped in their own stories. This clarity is not flashy. It does not announce itself. It expresses as steadiness, as patience, as an absence of unnecessary fear. This is the quiet power sleep offers when approached consciously, and this is why the deepest layer is always the least remembered. Not because it is inaccessible, but because it does not announce itself. It leaves no image behind, only a subtle sense that something essential remains even when everything else disappears. That sense, once recognized, becomes the axis around which all other experiences rotate. When you wake in the morning, the transition is so abrupt that it erases most of what came before it. Sensation rushes back. Weight returns. Thought assembles itself around a name, a history, a set of expectations. The world reasserts its rules and you step back into the role you left behind the night before. It feels seamless, natural, inevitable. But something always lingers. A faint echo. A residue you can't quite place. A feeling that you were somewhere else, that something meaningful occurred just beyond recall. Most people dismiss this sensation immediately. They reach for their phone, their schedule, their identity. The echo fades, another night passes unexamined, yet that echo is not imagination. it is continuity trying to re-establish itself. The deeper you understand what happens during sleep, the harder it becomes to treat waking life as the only meaningful state. You begin to see it as one layer in a much larger movement of awareness. Necessary, valuable, but not absolute. This realization does not pull you away from life. It brings you into it more fully. When you know that awareness persists beyond roles and outcomes, you engage more honestly, less defensively. You are no longer trying to secure an identity that feels fragile, because you've seen what remains when identity dissolves. This is the paradox ancient traditions understood. Preparing for death does not make you obsessed with it. It frees you from it. The fear that drives so much human behavior weakens when you recognize that you do not end when the body sleeps, and you do not vanish when form collapses. Sleep teaches this gently, night after night, without demanding belief. The tragedy is not that people die unprepared. It is that they sleep unprepared their entire lives. You have been practicing the transition since childhood. Each night, consciousness withdraws. Each morning, it returns. The cycle is so familiar that its significance disappears. But familiarity does not mean insignificance. It means proximity. The reason these teachings feel unsettling is because they strip away the illusion of permanence that society depends on. If this life is not the whole story, then fear loses its authority. If awareness continues, then meaning cannot be outsourced to systems, institutions, or narratives. It becomes personal, immediate. This is why the most important work is not spectacular. It is quiet, remembering dreams, noticing transitions, paying attention to the quality of awareness rather than the content of experience. These practices do not require belief. They require honesty. Honesty about how reactive you are, how easily attention fragments, how often fear takes the wheel. Sleep reveals this without judgment. It simply shows you what is, and it offers you a choice. You can continue to pass through these states unconsciously, letting habit dictate experience, or you can begin to carry awareness across the thresholds, not forcefully, not perfectly, just gently, consistently. The difference compounds. As awareness stabilizes in sleep, waking life changes. You become less hypnotized by urgency, less reactive to provocation, more capable of pausing before responding. You begin to see the same patterns at play in conversations, conflicts, and desires that you see in dreams. You notice how environments respond to your inner state, how tension creates resistance, how calm opens space. The lesson is the same across all layers. Awareness leads, experience follows. This is not mystical thinking. It is observation refined through repetition. You start to realize that the world you move through during the day is not as solid as it pretends to be. It responds to attention, belief, and expectation more than you were taught to notice. The dream world simply makes this responsiveness obvious. Once seen, it cannot be unseen. This does not mean you abandon responsibilities or withdraw from society. It means you stop mistaking the surface for the whole. You participate without forgetting yourself. The ancient goal was never escape from the world. It was freedom within it, to move through form without being owned by it, to experience fully without clinging. Sleep was the training ground because it removes the distractions that keep you forgetful. Death is not the beginning of something new. It is the continuation of something familiar. A deeper version of a transition you have already mastered countless times, often without realizing it. The only thing that makes death frightening is the belief that you have never been there before, but you have, every night. The difference is not the destination, it is the level of awareness you bring with you. If you approach sleep as disappearance, you will approach death the same way. If you approach it as transition, curiosity replaces fear. Presence replaces panic. This is why remembering matters. Not the details, not the imagery, the quality of awareness. You are not asked to believe any of this. Belief is irrelevant. Experience is enough. Tonight, when you lie down, notice the moment you usually rush past. The softening, the slide, the quiet. Don't analyze it. Don't force anything. Just notice. Let awareness remain where it usually collapses. You may remember nothing. That's fine. The act of noticing is already a shift. Over time, the echo grows stronger. Continuity begins to form. The gap between sleeping and waking narrows. And one day, perhaps when you least expect it, you will realize that you are no longer afraid of letting go.